Hi, and welcome back to day 2 of the Canadian Underground Forum. Our next session, unfortunately, Gord is not available right now in the interim while we're trying to get him connected up. I invited Jeff Zeiss, the zeitgeist behind this conference, to come on for some Q&A. There were a few questions that popped up, along the way, and I'd like to invite any of the panelists who are listening in to jump in at any time. Turn on your camera and unmute if any of these questions, if you want to jump into those. Well, Jeff, I want to go back to something that you had said earlier and in the podcast last week about the opportunities of going underground. I mean, Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man." I think the modernized update could be, "Go underground, young person." What opportunities do you see, especially with all we've heard in the last 2 days?
Yeah, Gavin, I think, it's how different sectors get hot at times. And I remember maybe 20, 30 years ago, after the breakup of AT&T, where the federal government in the United States was trying to introduce competition into the telecom sector. It'd been basically a monopoly before that. The US had like 2 telecoms, AT&T and another company. And they broke it up, and then there was a New England telephone company, there was a Pacific Bell, and so on, to try to develop competition. And this is an example where basically cell phones came along, and fiber, technology was developed that made the whole industry competitive. It just started to happen. And I see a parallel between what happened then in the telecom sector and what's happening right now in underground. What I find remarkable is that we can detect incredibly accurately from 600 kilometers up, basically 30 centimeters, and some people can do even better than that. And we have different, hyperspectral sensors and so on. It's incredible what we can detect from a long distance away. But the fact that 6 feet under the ground, we don't know where anything is. So number one, it's a huge opportunity. As just about every speaker has said, we don't know where things are underground. But I think the really interesting thing that we've heard at this conference is the fact that there are technologies out there now that mean you can solve this problem inexpensively. Right? So I think the best example, Danny's talk, last talk was really fascinating, because this problem that Danny talked about, I remember, I think my blog, which started in 2006, one of the first entries on that blog was about this very specific problem, the workflow from CAD through the guys in the field back to GIS. And just as Danny explained, it starts up with somebody using a fairly sophisticated electronic tool, CAD tool, AutoCAD, MicroStation. But the next step is producing a piece of paper. And the way I used to, one way you can describe a construction worker is a guy with a hard hat and a piece of paper in his hand, right? I mean, construction guys use pieces of paper, and there's a variety of reasons of why they do. I just walked by a residential construction site the other day, and sure enough, there was a guy with a piece of paper in his hand. So I think that this problem has been around for 20, 25 years. I mean, it's really amazing. And I think it's amazing that Danny and Locust View now are finding that customers are coming to them and saying, we need to have high accuracy. And I think this gets back to Rob Martindale talking about how legislation and regulations are required to motivate the construction industry to do this stuff. So that's sort of the context. The interesting thing, which I tried to allude to, I gave a little intro to this, is first of all, there's a lot of private money coming from insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and whatever. There's $60 trillion out there. And until around 2003, none of that money was really going into infrastructure. Infrastructure was being paid for by government, DOTs, people building highways, the United States, it would come through the gasoline tax. There's a variety of sources of how this was funded, but it was not funded by private money. And the fact that there is now private money going into infrastructure in a significant quantity, we're talking about tens of billions at least, and I think it's been trending up even into hundreds of billions, means that when private money goes into something, they want a return, a financial return, not a social return, a financial return. And that means basically that there is a really big driver now to improve productivity in construction. So that's the first really big thing that's happened. The second thing is that there's a lot of venture capital now going into construction. This used to not happen at all, right? I mean, the only venture capital that went into construction was somebody would do a new hammer, you know? I mean, that was about as far as we got. But now there is a significant amount of money going into venture capital. And I say, the companies we've heard from today, I think are also, I don't know whether they've got VC funding or whatever, but somebody has to fund this stuff. And I think the fact is that there's a huge opportunity, getting back to your original question, I know it's a long-winded answer, getting back to your original question is, not only is there's a big opportunity because there's a growing awareness of this problem, right? I think that's what's really remarkable about what we've heard from different jurisdictions like Colorado, Montana, Singapore, UK, etc., that there is a growing awareness, even at a national level, like in the UK, that this is a really big problem, that people get killed and maimed by doing this kind of thing. And there's an organization in the UK which tracks some of these things and actually has video showing how somebody hit an underground electric power line or a gas line and what the result was. So there's growing awareness of the problem, but the other part of it is that there's growing amounts of money going into solving this problem. Whether it's detection technology, I mean, 4M analytics, right? I mean, I think that is a really classic example. These guys came out of a military background. They were looking for IEDs and things like that, and then just thought, well, maybe we can find underground utilities using this kind of thing. And it's remarkable. I mean, because it solves a problem of safety. It solves the problem of being able to do this quickly and inexpensively. And I can give some other examples. Another example is a French company now who put basically magnetometers on a drone. One of the questions that came up is, why can't drones be used? Well, actually, you can use drones for this. I have a blog about this. A French company that put magnetometers on a drone and can fly a drone over a road or a field, wherever you want, and can detect underground assets to within 6 or 7 centimeter accuracy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, it looks like we finally got Gord back online here.
Fantastic.
And so we looks like we can give Gord the full 30 minutes here. Jeff, let's wrap back into this subject again later.
Sure, absolutely.
So Gord, Gord with Infrastructure Ontario, back into that policy and implementation. So Gord, please take it away.
Good afternoon. Presumably you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to come and well, for those who were online yesterday during our chat, you got a bit of a preview into this, and for those who weren't on yesterday, this will be new, but hopefully it's not overly repetitive from what we talked about yesterday with Prashant. So just by way of introduction, my name is Gord Reynolds, and I'm with Infrastructure Ontario. Infrastructure Ontario is an agency of the provincial government, and we're responsible, amongst other things, for working with the private sector to renew infrastructure in the province. That includes developing new infrastructure, specifically linear infrastructure like transit and highways. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a program that we've developed with our sister agency Metrolinx, which is the regional rail organization that runs the transit system, the regional transit system in and around the Toronto area and South Central Ontario. and they have a very ambitious program that they've embarked on. So just by way of an agenda, I'll do a little introduction to our utility coordination scheme and how we're coordinating work under our new program. I'll talk to you a little bit about our Office of Utility Coordination, which is the team that we've developed. It's a people process technology configuration that we've developed to help us enhance our utility coordination model, and then talk to you about how we're centralizing all of the asset data and how we're looking to take that on to new opportunities. So for background, the government identified an opportunity to expand on its transit agenda. It launched a very ambitious program with 4 priority subway projects. For those of you that are familiar with the Toronto area, one of them is the extension of Line 1 north on Yonge Street up into York Region. Another is an extension of the currently under construction Eglinton Light Rail west towards the airport. And the replacement or reconfiguration of the Scarborough light rail system and expansion of that. And then what was previously referred to as the relief line, which is now referred to as the Ontario line, running from the Ontario Place down on the waterfront next to the exhibition grounds up into the northeast part of Toronto where the Ontario Science Centre is, where it'll connect up with the currently under construction Eglinton LRT. So those 4 programs are worth just under $30 billion. The government introduced some enabling legislation early last year, referred to as the Building Transit Faster Act. And in that legislation, there were some measures that provided for, amongst other things, the ability to, or the compulsion for utilities to better coordinate their activities with Metrolinx. We embarked on a process shortly thereafter to work with key stakeholders in the utility space, as well as the Ministry of Transportation, who was the ministry responsible for the act, as well as Metrolinx, to come up with a scheme that would allow us to use the powers in the legislation should we require them, but ultimately develop a coordination scheme that would allow us to work without constantly relying on legislation. And to make that happen, we really carved the work up into 2 chunks. One was called the Utility Coordination Program, and that was the effort of sitting down with industry stakeholders to map out, quite literally, step by step, how the work happens. And granted, we recognize this work does not flow in a linear fashion all the time, and a lot of the work is happening simultaneously, and there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of conflicts constantly occurring within the program at different stages. But we mapped out what would be the workflows and got consensus amongst all the impacted utilities on that workflow. And so we have a really well documented understanding, and that was underpinned by what the guideline when accepted.
I'm sorry, Gordon, there was a technical glitch there. We lost about a minute of your audio, and there's a request. Could you make your PowerPoint full screen?
Oh, apologies.
Yeah, no problem. And then actually you can go all the way through till 35 minutes past the hour. So you've got 11 more minutes.
Okay.
Cool.
So hopefully that's full screen now. So we mapped out the process. We encapsulated that in what we refer to as a guideline, which becomes part of the act. It's a regulation in and of itself. And it's basically a how-to manual for how organizations will use the workflows that we've developed. And then we set up the Office of Utility Coordination, which has sort of a single version of truth. It's a GeoSpatial dashboard that allows us to monitor all the activities and share all that information with all the stakeholders at the same time. So today we've done the workflow work, we've done the guideline work, we've launched the Office of Utility Coordination and the dashboards. We have a spatial library with all of the different alignments for all of the transit projects loaded in there. We have all our utility conflicts in there. We continue to add to those data sets as we build out the CAD files for and the BIM files for all the things that are to be constructed. And we continue to improve at quality level, B or A in some cases, using SU work to improve on these utility conflicts, and then start developing treatments and relocation plans that all get loaded into the spatial library. So, none of this will be news to anybody, right? There were a lot of challenges in building big linear projects in an urban center. These are really the challenges, the principal ones that we're looking to resolve as part of the work with the OUC. And big piece for us was get a really highly qualified, dedicated team. For those of you who were on yesterday, Alon Gatt, he's supposed to be with me today. He sends his regrets he couldn't join us this afternoon, but it's his team that runs this utility coordination scheme for us, using this platform that we've developed, the spatial. It's a map first approach based on Esri. And then we have all of the tracking and coordinating around all the different activities and the different stakeholders. Some quick win benefits to talk about, like, visibility, transparency, good accountability. We're able to trace it back to the legislation and demonstrate how the legislation adds value. And a big piece for us has been tracking all the documentation. As everybody who's been involved in big construction projects knows, lots of documents. When and if we have disputes, those are going to be many, many years out, and making sure those documents are cataloged and archived in a way that they can easily be retrieved, ideally to avoid disputes later on. But should we have to get into resolving a dispute formally, all of the documents there are there, and they're geotagged back to a data set for easy reference. The dashboard builds out a number of views that allows you to track conflicts and track work either at the line level, the utility level, at the conflict level. You can do segments. It automatically rationalizes based on what you're seeing on the screen. If you look at the whole line view, you'll get the whole line. This screenshot here just looks at the entire Ontario line, for example. But it will give you all the conflicts. And if you hover over any of the conflicts, it gives you all of the data related to that conflict, what the asset is, who's the owner, any of the attributes that we've been able to either get from asset registries or from our SU work, and to the extent that there's a plan to develop a treatment or a relocation for it, it's all spatially tagged in there. And we manage these, what we refer to as cases. It's a case management approach. These are sort of tickets that get created, if you will, around each of the conflicts that have the regime. All of this goes back to a utility baseline document or a conflict matrix that gets managed as well in the background. So, the spatial hub, provides us a lot of spatial information, X, Y, Z, for us to use, not just for this for these transit projects, but obviously once we have that data and we continue to improve on that set, it helps us with all other projects in the area. Our past behavior would have us capturing that data and then often disposing of it or losing it, and not maintaining it somewhere where we could rely on it later. Many of these assets, whether it be the road line, the center line of the road, or whether they be wet assets, or a lot of the infrastructure in the city doesn't change, but there's always new stuff coming in, so we do have to continue to update it. And because Metrolinx now has authority under the Act to manage and maintain its own right-of-way, it, like a municipality, will be responsible for issuing consents for utility conflicts or new utility construction activity within its right-of-way and easements. And so it will have a municipal consent process, and so it will always be referring back to this data set to help it manage those approvals. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but there's a lot of other opportunities to leverage this data for other applications, not the least of which is providing improved broadband service to those in Ontario who are lacking. We've identified about 700,000 homeowners in Ontario that are lacking, and a lot of this data and the application of this data and the approach we're using in the Office of Utility Coordination allows us to work with all the key stakeholders in a really transparent, coordinated fashion. And using a map-first approach helps us build out and plan how we get to those that are underserved. And another application that we're identifying here is next generation 911 and how we work with, for those of you who are familiar with NG 911, it again is very map-based and relies heavily on municipalities providing us all of their reference data that can be used to improve on service delivery with respect to whether it be paramedic treatment, fire, or police, and coordinating across those different what they refer to as PSAPs, public service access providers. Anyway, so with that, I've a little bit of discussion about this yesterday. We're working with the University of Waterloo and the Center for the Advancement of Trenchless Technologies, Professor Mark Knight. I'll give him a little shout out. His team there, great to work with, doing a qualitative and quantitative assessment on our enhanced regime. And so stay tuned for University of Waterloo to publish that report the end of the year. And it should speak to how Ontarians are benefiting, not just from how are we managing the risk with respect to the project construction, but on a value for money basis, how did these regimes improve our outcomes and reduce costs and risk? Opportunities like this to join you and share some of what we're doing and engage industry to inform, but also to be informed and to get input from folks who are involved in this type of work, either in Ontario or across Canada, or more broadly, the US, Australia, UK. We've had very good results in getting people to feed us lessons learned, and anecdotally or formally, and give us their advice. In some cases, it's aspirational things that they're looking to do, want to do, but giving us some suggestion. And for those of you who are paying attention to what Ontario is doing with broadband, you'll see that we have taken a lot of those suggestions and applied them to the Building Broadband Faster Act that just recently became law, and will allow us to work with telecommunication service providers, ISPs, TSPs, however people want to refer to them, and allow us to collaborate more effectively with utilities, as has been done in the US with the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC program to improve broadband. We're modeling much of what we're doing off their successes there and lessons learned. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. But thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share a little bit about what we're doing.
Okay, Gord, we can go into the break a bit on questions, and thanks for that presentation. Yeah, thanks for the additional detail from what you discussed yesterday. So I wanted to talk about those opportunities you talked about. Somebody asked about, well, I mean, with Toronto in particular, is there talk of rolling this into a digital twin, or is there a digital twin effort going on that you know of?
Well, so we talk about the value of collecting that data and retaining it and archiving it, using it, for other purposes. We're certainly doing that within within the transit portfolio. We'll be retaining that data and maintaining the data that we collect and updating it within the right of way. While certainly we've had discussions at the provincial level with lots of ministries about the value of that, there's yet to be, I think, consensus across government in Ontario on how we would execute that. Infrastructure Ontario currently maintains data sets for a number of ministries, including those that provide essential services for 911 services, or maintaining the registry for all the real estate portfolio the province owns, and things like that. So we have a lot of that information today, and we think there's a strong rationale for bringing that together with the information that we collect on the construction projects that the province is currently embarked on, whether they be highway, transit, or broadband. And if you were to bring in all the information we're going to collect on broadband, all the information we're going to collect on highway expansion and improvement projects, all of the other construction we're doing around long-term care, courthouses, hospitals, there's not a lot left, right? There's not a lot of white space left. There's a lot of data being collected there. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just kind of popping it off the top of my head. I don't know if that's 95% or 85%, but it's a big portion of the data that would be available. So it starts to, there starts to be a pretty sound argument for why wouldn't you put that all in one place? Why wouldn't you make it available under whatever standards the government has for open data sharing? The City of Toronto does do that with a lot of its data around development data and other data like that. We'll start to collaborate with municipal partners and our federal partners, as we talked about yesterday as well, start making that data available to those, whether it be for project planning work, whether it be planning around community development, whether it be other infrastructure projects. But I think you're starting to get pretty close to the idea of a digital twin there, and how that gets enshrined in legislation, if it is something people are compelled to do, is I think still a ways off before we even have those formal discussions. At this point, we're still very much in voluntary sharing of data. And for broadband, we're developing agreements with the large infrastructure owners to share data voluntarily, but it's certainly not something we're opposed to thinking about and compelling people to provide it if we feel necessary.
Of course, yeah, there are security considerations for certain utilities, the electric utilities and the large water mains and things like that. But a question somebody had was, are you using the satellite monitoring of land deformation like they did with the London Corridor project?
Yeah, so we've talked to a couple of vendors who have shown us how they've used that technology abroad, and a couple of demos that have been done here. We're particularly interested right now on very dense areas, and we're finding that technology has its limitations with respect to getting us to a level of insight that is useful. We get a lot of data from our infrastructure partners. We improve on that data through SU analysis pretty quickly. And often in dense urban environments, those SU projects in and of themselves unearth, pardon the pun, other infrastructure that we weren't aware of, either because it was mislocated or unlocated or whatever. And many of the providers that we work with, a lot of the SU providers and surveying organizations that we worked with, obviously have experience. I mean, the industry has matured significantly since we began doing SU work. I don't even remember now how long it was, but 20 plus years ago. We defined that as a discipline and started applying it in Ontario with some rigor. These providers now have some maturity and a certain amount of institutional memory of their own, independent of the records that the infrastructure holders own. And so we're getting a lot of good insight from working with good partners who tell us, this provider's data set's not great, but we actually already went and located and found all this stuff, and we can share that improved data set with you. That's one of the things that we're working on with the broadband program, is how do we improve, for example, the one call regime and its relationship with members and the members' obligations under the one call legislation here in Ontario. Are there things we could be doing to motivate and or compel those who own infrastructure and are obligated to locate it to ensure that their locations are done in a timely manner and an accurate manner. And to the extent that they're not able to deliver those in a timely, accurate way, what would be the consequence up into, including, but not limited to, paying for redesign to the extent. So that's one of the things that we're contemplating now.
Cool. I was going to ask about, what's the hammer to make sure they do stuff. But the other question is long term. Now, a lot of projects build essentially a digital twin of a construction corridor or a construction site. But what about after commissioning? What are the plans to keep that data up to date?
Yeah, so we do have a digital twin in the corridor of the everything that's constructed, everything that's there, and everything that's to be there, including all the utilities and infrastructure, including the station boxes and the alignments, the tunnels, whether it's below grade, at grade, or above grade. That's all rendered three-dimensionally in the OUC platform that I talked very quickly about. And as I mentioned, the Building Transit Faster Act has a provisions that give Metrolinx similar powers to that of a municipality with respect to municipal consent within its corridor. And that includes, there's a buffer zone above, below, and beside, to the extent it's underground, or just beside and below if it's at grade, for any existing or new infrastructure that is to be built. So obviously the municipality, first and foremost, has its own municipal consent process and municipal access agreements that it develops and enters into, and has its own requirements of infrastructure owners. But Metrolinx has now new authorities, and it will require especially new infrastructure or improvements to legacy infrastructure to be records to be provided in accordance with CSA S250, so that it can continue to update its records with respect to as-built within its corridors.
Excellent. Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. Thanks again, and sorry about the shifting schedule thing, but appreciate the elaborating on yesterday's points. There's one last question, more of a comment from someone who wants to talk about the satellite or the INSAR. We can talk offline. Yes, you can get 1 centimeter motion in denser areas. Actually, you can get millimeters in a lot of areas, but there's a lot of limitations. I've been using INSAR on corridor projects for quite a while, and we've got some feedback we could share with you. So for the person that posted that, we'll talk offline. Thanks again, Gord.